being Babylon. And I know America gets viewed as Babylon because of its possessions, because of its wealth. America gets viewed as Babylon because of all of the things that it, in essence, controls around the world as far as commerce goes, as far as, American money buying oil, buying textiles from around the world. And they accuse us of being Babylon because should our dollar fail, should our finances fail, many of the countries will go broke. And they would assume that as America's finances go down, that this is why the merchants would cry. But this is not what it's talking about. Chapter 18, verse number 12. Or let's start with verse 11 so we can actually see what's taking place. The merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her when God destroys Babylon. They'll weep and mourn over her, for no man buys her merchandise anymore. The merchandise of gold, silver, precious stones, pearls, fine linen, purple silk, scarlet, fine wood, all manner of vessels of ivory, all manner of vessels of precious wood, brass, iron, marble, cinnamon, odors, ointments, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, beasts, sheep, horses, chariots, slaves, souls of men, fruits of the soul. And it goes on and just lists everything. But I want you to see that this isn't talking about Catholics, Mormons. This isn't talking about a sect of Christianity, or even for that matter, a sect of Muslims. This is talking about literally a system that has come into play since the days of Babylon. And again, the vision of Daniel, the vision of Nebuchadnezzar, of the man, Daniel specifically addresses, "Thou, O king, art the head of gold." Speaking to Nebuchadnezzar, it isn't until the stone kingdom comes. Now, when that stone kingdom comes, that represents literally the coming of Jesus, the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, he who will establish government, as Isaiah would say. When that kingdom comes and strikes that image in the foot, what happens? It crumbles from the top to the bottom. So Babylon gets destroyed in the very end. So that's about it. Now, we were reading about Hitler. What a place to learn about Hitler. You come to church and you learn about Hitler. Let's see. We're dealing with the protocols of Zion. Remember that? And later on, after I guess it was prior to World War I when they discovered these, some people decided they wanted to put this on the Jews. So they started inserting Jewish language in there to make people think it was a Jewish plot. We already talked about some of these. Let's see. All right, we started on this new cult group. And we're reading out of Rule by Secrecy, Jim Mars. If anything, go grab this one. This is like the program at a ball game. Gives you a little bit of everything. The term theosophy. In fact, the chapter or the segment is called Theosophists, Thulists, and Other Cultists. And if you're familiar with Adolf Hitler and the Nazi war machine and their religious system, you're going to hear the word theosophist a lot. You're going to hear Thulist. The term theosophy is derived from the Greek words theos, meaning God, Sophia, meaning wisdom, and has been interpreted as meaning divine wisdom. Theosophy came into usage in 1875 when Russian-born mystic named Helena Petrovna Blavatsky founded the Theosophical Society in New York City. Blavatsky had immigrated to America in 1873 after many years of travel and research in Europe and the Middle East. Between 1887 and 1888, Blavatsky published the occult material, including her two most famous books, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine. Both were intended to present a quasi-scientific underpinning for religion, then in decline, due to scientific discoveries and the theories of Charles Darwin. So, again, in the vacuum of dissatisfaction with religion, and this is what happens often, this is what actually prompts and even for that matter feeds that which we refer to as scientism, not just science, scientism, which is basically a form of religion, in that much of science is nothing more than a thesis or a theory that's really not even supported by proof, so to say. That like evolution, where much of what evolution stands on is nothing more than ideals or theories that have no basis in truth. There's no factual evidence to support it, yet everybody knows what evolution is about. In fact, they teach evolution even above creationism. So evolution is something that's preferred by those which refer to themselves as scientific, but they completely violate even the scientific theory of things. Because in order to follow even that scientific method that we were all trained up in school. How many of you were trained up to utilize the scientific method? The way to establish truth, scientific method was you're going to come up with a thesis or the theory. Once you've established your thesis, you're going to have to start to do what? Gather data. Once you've made your thesis, you're going to have to prove what you said is true. So you gather data to support your thesis. Once you've gathered data, what do? Now you begin to experiment. You begin to look for those repeatables. You're looking for that consistent thing to occur over and over. So you made your thesis, now you're gathering data, now you perform your experiments. After you perform your experiments and you get your product or your end result, now what you do is look for repeatables. So you experiment over again, seeing if you get the same results. Well, if you get the same results, then you can establish your thesis as fact. Your conclusion is, this is my thesis. Thesis is true because of repeated experimentation. Now, that's what science demands. At least that's what the original science demanded. Today, science doesn't demand that. Science simply demands, or science simply is based on a man making a theory without any proof or without any experimentation. Now, when that happens, what we enter into is something just as religious or faith-based as Christianity or any other religion. Because now you're forced to believe by faith in something that has no basis or no factual truth. And that's the way they view Christianity, by the way. I'm not saying Christianity has no basis or fact and truth. So in the vacuum of these things always occur. So this lady, and it's no mystery that usually it's a lady behind this stuff. All right. In 1878, Blavatsky, along with her ardent follower, U.S. Army Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, moved the society's headquarters to Madras, India, where it remains today. Theosophical Society spread throughout the East and West and into Europe and America, bringing significant attention to Eastern philosophies. The promotion of Buddhism and Hinduism greatly affected several religious-oriented movements, including the I Am, the Liberal Catholic Church, the Rosicrucians, the Unity Church, and more recently, various New Age groups. Now, let's stop there, because this is back in the early 1800s, or actually the late 1800s, coming into the 1900s. And what we have here is a movement that occurs or that comes into being because of the failure of Christianity. And again, why was Christianity failing? Because in light of the new science that was coming in, the scientific research that was being proven true, what was happening in the church? It was losing its credibility. See, this is what happens when Christianity starts to preach crap, all right? When you start to preach on things that have nothing to do with the Bible, what's going to happen? As time goes on, what happens when these things prove insignificant in life? Then those sermons were crap, right? You got a lot of people out there preaching trash, preaching political ideas. It's trash. And what happens 10 years later? I mean, you had all these people that were preaching against rock music. Now we find out that the music is pretty benign and that it's stupid now. How many agree that television today is worse than it was 10 years ago? So when they were preaching, this is crap, if you watch TV, you're going to go to hell. If you watch TV, you're going to turn gay. And when they're preaching this stuff 10 years later, you wish television was like that. So what does that do to the gospel? It just turns it into nothing. Well, this is the backdrop to which this stuff came. Now, is there anything different today? When you watch television, and even for that matter, movies, my kids, they even go get these Disney movies, and even with things like The Lion King. You ever notice that the religious undertones of all those are Indian, Eastern, animation from even our pre-Columbian Indians here in this continent? You ever notice how everything has, rather than a Christian religious answer to it, it has some old Indian ritual? Some form of meditation? You ever notice when the mummies come and nobody says anything about Jesus? You got to have some Egyptian cartouche or something that saves you? The promotion of Buddhism, Hinduism greatly affected several religious-oriented movements, including I Am, Liberal Catholic Church, Rosicrucians, Unity Church, more recently, New Age groups. Theosophy drew its thinking from the same early philosophers venerated by the social societies of Freemasonry, the Illuminati, the Round Tables, Plato, Pythagoras, as well as Egyptian mystery schools. According to author Nesta Webster, it is evident that Blavatsky drew heavily from the Hebrew Kabbalah and the Talmud, cementing the connection with ancient mysteries. Writing in 1924, Webster warned, the Theosophical Society is not a study group, but essentially a propaganda society which aims at substituting for the pure and simple teaching of Christianity the amazing compound of Eastern superstition, Kabbalism, and the 18th century charlatanism. Blavatsky's society taught the belief of one creator, that there was an underlying unity in the universe, including all humans, the secret meanings that are found in all religions, and most controversial, the great masters or adepts sometimes called the Great White Brotherhood. They're secretly directing the evolution of humankind. Blavatsky, in forming the German branch of Theosophical Society in 1884, brought our belief in channeling, reincarnation, racial superiority, and extraterrestrial visitation to people who later would form the theological basis of Nazism. Now, I know when you hear this, it sounds pretty far-reaching and pretty silly, especially the parts where it talks about extraterrestrial visitations. I mean, people sit here and think, come on, give me a break. Yeah, I mean, now I don't say this to make people feel dumb, but it's usually the naive who sit back and say, who believes in that? Some of the most educated people on the planet, some of the people in the highest offices, they embrace these things. Not because they're stupid, but usually because they're smart. Now, I don't say that in saying Christians are dumb. I'm just saying that Christians, rather than do any research, we just say, oh, that's stupid. Oh, that's the devil. I mean, we end up like the water boy's mother. Everything's the devil. German occultists like Lanz von Liebenfels, Guido von List, and Rudolf von Sabettendorf borrowed heavily from Blavatsky. They sought to show the ancient Germans had been the keepers of the secret science which originated in Eden or Atlantis, wrote author William Henry. So these people actually understand that there is a connection. Now, I think when we went over the study on the ethnicities and we talked about the roots of these people, we found that much of what we refer to as Germany today was, is what was at one time Assyrian, that hated the Germans. So these people have their roots in places that most people don't even understand. The rationale behind many later Nazi projects can be traced back to ideas first popularized by Blavatsky, who detailed connections with other European secret organizations. We have the Theosophical Society, the OTO, which is the Ordo Templi Orientis, or the Oriental Templars, Dr. Rudolf Steiner's Anthroposophical Society, the Order of the Golden Dawn, all intertwined in incestuous embrace. Following World War I, the occult societies began to merge with political activism, particularly in southern Germany. Munich was flooded with anti-communist Russian refugees. Dietrich Eckhart was delighted to find in the protocols what he saw as the final proof of the long-theorized Jewish Masonic Bolshevik world conspiracy. Now, see, this is what happens. Is this conspiracy Jewish? But it's very simple that as people begin to do the research, they start to find out there's Jewish people in there, and they immediately make it a Jewish plot. The story of the circulation of the protocols of the wise men of Zion would seem to indicate the existence of an international network of secret connections, cooperating forces, described early enough in the protocols themselves, commented Haydn. The protocol was especially received well in Germany. Now, remember what those protocols were. I'm not going to go over them again. Remember the protocols? They're just going to blatantly lie to you. They're going to use school to lie to you. Despite what's true, they're going to tell you what's wrong. They're going to preoccupy your mind with entertaining. They're going to make sporting events so big nobody cares. Isn't that funny how you can fill a Laker game, but you can't fill a church? Huh? You can fill an Olympic stadium for soccer, but you can't fill a church. Isn't that amazing? Janet Jackson comes to concert. You can fill that place up, but you can't fill up a church. Isn't that amazing? That people are so preoccupied with entertainment, and we think it's our idea. We think it's all right as Americans to have this outlet, not even understanding that this is part of a plan. Now, somebody will say, oh, come on, you believe that's a plan? Well, you can decide for yourself whether or not this is just accident, this is just the evolution of humankind, or if this is actually somebody who allowed this design to unfold to the extent that we now have evolved to fulfill, and not only fulfill, but to take these protocols, have them applied or literally applied to us very subtly, and we don't even know it. And that which we call freedom really isn't freedom. It's a controlled experiment. Some people don't like that idea. The protocols were especially well received in Germany, where a distraught and impoverished population was asking why they had been defeated in war. Remember, after World War I, the Germans, this master race, this group's trying to figure out what happened. With no blacks, Hispanics, or Asians at hand, the lot of the scapegoat fell on the Eastern European Jews. The circulation of the protocols ignited long-smoldering anti-Semitism into a red-hot bonfire of hatred and division. So they blamed it on the Jews. Political factions fought throughout the nation with a newly arrived communist philosophy, gaining great inroads in a disillusioned public unaccustomed to self-rule. Now, where'd the communist ideals come from? Were they born at the grassroots of Russia? Where'd they come from? They came from the West. The son of a rabbi, an Englishman, from France and Belgium. To counter this communist threat and the spreading chaos, more than 24 right-wing nationalist organizations sprang up in Munich alone. Among them was the Thule Society, named after the mythic German homeland of icebound Ultima Thule. The logo of the society was a swastika superimposed over a sword. Thule, in the mind of the German occultists, was a Teutonic Atlantis. Now remember, how did we talk about the Teutonic Knights a little bit? Talked about the Teutonic Knights. I might talk about them a little more as we go on. Thule, in the minds of the German occultists, was a Teutonic Atlantis, a mystical prehistoric island of the northern climes, believed to be the home of a long-vanished civilization of extraterrestrials who lost awareness of their origins by inbreeding with humans. Now, when we get to things like that, everybody just says, oh, that's ridiculous. That's Genesis 6. Huh? Now, people believe this. Now, it's true. The Germans got their butts kicked in the war. And they're looking for someone to blame because, the master race done got whooped. And they're blaming it on the Jews. And people are reaching for some form of hope. And now this Thule Society springs up and tells them that they're from a master race of extraterrestrials that forgot where they came from because they got interbred with humans. And people say, oh, that's stupid. That's what Genesis 6 says, doesn't it? Genesis 6 says there was some extraterrestrials that came down, and they liked the women here, and they bred, had babies, and God had to flood the world. Now there's a book out there called The Key. I'm telling you, it is one of the most fascinating books I have ever read in my life. Very old book, The Key. In fact, a lot of people don't like that book, especially Japanese folk, because The Key is one of those books that shows you that the original inhabitants of Japan are white people. And the Japanese hide them in the mountains. Don't come down. And they're the ancient samurai, which people theorize come from Samaria in the migrations. Some of those people that decided they're fleeing east instead of west, or north and west. But they're white. And Japan hides these folk, because Japan came up with a theory of their own, that the sun god came down on Mount Fuji and took a female host and made the Japanese people. That messes them up to find out there's some white folk in the woodshed. So they hide them in the mountains. These white guys, they look funny, man. They got pictures of them. Most fascinating book I ever read. But what the book does is it traces, through etymology, the common occurrence of language around the world, despite the lack of the ability to travel intercontinentally. Why we have the same words and how it got there. And one of the theories is that Og, one of these great giants, survived the flood by riding on the ridge post of the ark. Now people look at stuff like this and say, this is stupid. Well, how do you explain the way you say water in Mexico is agua? The way you say it in Europe was aqua. Huh? The way you say it in Japan is wa. How do you explain that? Or in China, how do you explain the same word for water? Fascinating book. Incredibly fascinating. One of the most fascinating things I've ever read. But here you've got literally people who understand the concept of an infusion by extraterrestrials. Now listen, this is what being born again is all about. See, an extraterrestrial, what did Jesus say? He says, I know from where I come from the Father. What's Jesus saying about himself? I'm not from this earth. What did he pray in John 17? I'm not of this world, but I pray for them because you're going to keep them in this world. Right? Isn't that what he was praying? Where was Jesus from? Now what saves us? What saves us is an infusion from the extraterrestrial, Jesus. Now see, nobody ever puts it in this language. That's why every time we watch alien movies, and then you got these jackasses over at that Calvary Chapel, that every time you mention, alien, space travel, or anything, they just, poop their diapers and blame the devil. But extraterrestrial simply means not from this earth. And heaven happens to be a planet that isn't here. And Jesus says, I'm from above. You're from your father, the devil. So this stuff isn't so far-fetched to people who are reaching for answers. This is why there's so many people into those New Age cults, try to figure out why they go out into the desert and listen to Shirley MacLaine talk like a man. Huh? This isn't too far-fetched. People still looking for answers. Got all these celebrities raised up in Christian houses, born strict Catholics. Next thing you know, they're big fans of the Kabbalah. Want to be Jews. It doesn't surprise me when you find out, all these movie stars become, Scientologists. They're looking for answers. Christian church ain't coming through. It's just preaching crap. Same stuff. Thule in the minds of German occultists was a Teutonic Atlantis, a mystical prehistoric island, northern climes, believed to be the home of long-vanished civilization of extraterrestrials who lost awareness of their origins by inbreeding with humans. Eckhart Sebatendorf and their followers believed that the advance of science of Thules had survived through the centuries, handed down by the select initiates into the secret esoteric wisdom. Thulists were continually seeking the wisdom through rituals designed to contact superior beings. The inner core of the Thule group were all Satanists who practiced black magic, wrote Trevor Ravenscroft. He's the guy that wrote the book concerning the spear of the Roman who pierced Jesus' side, the spear of destiny. So Trevor Ravenscroft, he says they're Satanists practicing black magic. That is to say that they were solely concerned with raising their consciousness by means of rituals to an awareness of evil and non-human intelligences in the universe, with achieving a means of communication with these intelligences. It is well known that in Munich during those turbulent post-war years that there were several hundred unsolved political murders and kidnappings. It was from these missing persons, most of whom were either Jews or communists, that we must look to find the sacrificial victims who were murdered in the rites of astrological magic carried out by Dietrich Eckhart and the innermost circle of the Thule Gesellschaft. Charles Ravencroft, who claimed it was a well-known fact that the Thulists were also a society of assassins. Now again, you might say, what does this have to do with Hitler? It has everything to do with Hitler. We're getting to him. All right? We're trying to figure out what sprung him on the scene. Assassins or not, it's true that on April 7, 1919, when communist revolutionaries held Munich for a short period proclaiming a Bavarian Soviet Republic, the only people they rounded up and executed as dangerous subversives were the members of the Thule Society, including its young secretary and prince, von Thurn und Taxis. His name was von Thurn und Taxis. By May 3rd, Army veterans compromising the Freikorps, or the Free Corps, with their helmets festooned with the swastika of the Thule Society, they ridded Munich of the Bolsheviks. It was this last serious threat to Germany by communism until after World War II. The monarchists and the industrialists of the Thule knew that they had to win the support of the rank-and-file worker to defeat the socialist-laden labor unions. To this end, they adopted two-pronged strategy. While Munich's businesses, military, and intellectual leaders plotted at the Thule Society meetings, in the Four Seasons Hotel, a second blue-collar organization was formed, the German Worker Party, run by sports writer Karl Harrer and the railroad machinist Anton Drexler. According to Time Life editors, the Thule Society had contacted Drexler because it hoped to foment the workers' revolution, but knew nothing about workers. So now you've got two things happening. Socialists kicked out, Munich still in an uproar, got a two-pronged plan going now, One through the Thulists, and the other through the German Workers' Party. Where did Hitler come through? Where did he get his power from? Where did he get his political roots from? The German Workers' Party. The party was created January 1919 by merging Drexler's Committee of Independent Workmen with the Herr-led Political Workers' Circle. The circle had been founded by Theophilus Sebatendorf, who was also instrumental in creating the great Germanendoren. The Germanendoren was an order patented after the Freemasons, but decidedly anti-Mason and anti-Jewish, with intricate initiations and ceremonies extolling the glories of German mythology and medieval Teutonic knights who were formed through the Knights Templar. Noted Hitler biographer John Toland describes Sebatendorf only as a man of mystery and a devotee of Plato. As it turned out, Sebatendorf was actually born Rudolf Glauer, the son of Dresden railroad engineer. The count said that he had been legally adopted by Count Heinrich von Sebatendorf and had the right to claim the inherited title. Eckert and others declined to expose the true identity for fear of discrediting their cause. Widely perceived as subversive, Sebatendorf's Germanenorden contrived the Thule Society as a cover organization. The original conception of the modern Thulists was extremely crude and naive, wrote Ravencroft. The more sophisticated versions of the legend of Thule only gradually developed in the hands of Dietrich Eckart and General Karl Haushofer, and were later refined and extended under the direction of Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler. You all know him, right? The chicken farmer who formed the SS, who terrorized a large section of the German academic world into lending professional hand at perpetuating the myth of German racial superiority. Let's see what we'll do here. According to William Bramley, Haushofer was the member of the Vril, another society based on the book by British Rosicrucian Lord Bulwer Lytton about the visit of an Aryan super race to Earth in the distant past. Haushofer was mentor to both Hitler and Deputy Rudolf Hess. Himmler was another notable member of the Vril. Haushofer had traveled extensively in the Far East before becoming general in the Kaiser's army. His early associations with influential Japanese businessmen and statesmen were crucial in forming the German-Japanese alliance of World War II. He was also the highest-ranking Nazi to form important relationships with South American governments in anticipation of military and political action against the United States. Relationships that eventually would be exploited by war criminals, Nazi cultists fleeing the reach of the Nuremberg prosecutors. Backed by violent thugs of Army Captain Ernest Roehm's brown shirts, and incited by anti-Jewish and anti-Bolshevik diatribes, the fledgling German Workers' Party joined the growing opposition to unstable the Weimar government. Eckart, who carried out dual membership in both the fledgling party and the Thule Society, remained the German Workers' Party leader. We need a leader at its head who can stand the sound of a machine gun. The rabble need to get fear into their pants. We can't use an officer because the people don't respect them anymore. The best would be a worker who knows how to talk. He doesn't need much brains. He must be a bachelor, then he'll get the women. He told members during a meeting in 1919. Next part of the chapter is the leader arrives. Eckert found his leader in the form of an army intelligence agent sent to infiltrate the party, a failed Austrian painter named Adolf Hitler, once described as a child of Illuminism. It has well been documented how Hitler and Eckart shared Eckhart's interest in the supernatural and the occult. As a child in Austria, he thrived on heroic folk tales of the German Teutonic Knights. As a destitute artist in Vienna before World War I, Hitler he haunted the libraries and old bookstores, filling his mind with esoteric lore and Jewish propaganda. An admirer of Hegel and his philosophies, he also studied ancient history, Eastern religions, yoga, occultism, hypnotism, theosophy, and astrology. According to Ravenscroft, he even sought some enlightenment, 1960 style, by ingesting hallucinogenic drugs. It was in the small black office of the bookshop in the old quarter of the city that Ernest Presky, the shop owner, unveiled for Hitler the secrets hidden behind the astrological and alchemical symbolism of the search for the Grail. Now, when we talk about the Grail, everybody that's read the mythology of King Arthur understand the story of the Holy Grail. It's supposed to be this cup that Jesus took the Last Supper with his disciples with. And yet, to other people, the Grail literally represented the bloodline of Jesus. So this was one of Hitler's, I guess, long-standing searches. Ravenscroft, let's see. It was here, too, that the sinister hunchback handed to his monstrous pupil a drug which evoked the clairvoyant vision of the Aztecs, the magic peyote, and it venerated like a deity. Ravenscroft, former British commando officer, reported that while in Vienna, Hitler became so obsessed with the so-called spear of destiny, reportedly the spear of the Roman soldier named Gaius Cassius, who pierced the side of Jesus on the cross, not as punishment, but to mercifully shorten his agony. What claims to be the spear is still exhibited in the Hofburg Museum in Vienna. It was here, according to Ravenscroft, that young Hitler learned the legend that whoever possesses the lance or the holy spear controls the destiny of the world. In his book, The Spear of Destiny, Ravenscroft weaves a rich tapestry of Germanic history and folklore, tying Hitler and the spear to a detailed background of magic, occultism, and secret societies. Ravenscroft attributed his knowledge to the spear and to Hitler by his mentor, Dr. Walter Johannes Stein, a Viennese scientist and philosopher who knew Hitler but later fled to England. Stein told how Hitler entered a trance while channeling non-human entities into proximity to the spear. I think it's enough to know Hitler was a nut. All right. 162. It is interesting to note that the term Aryan, it's a Sanskrit word meaning noble, until the time of Hitler usually referred merely to people using Indo-European languages rather than to a race. However, in both scholarly and occult studies, the term also is connected to an Indo-European speaking people traceable to prehistoric times. These people were unknown origins, but due to common language characteristics, many scholars believe they came from northern Europe. One branch of these Aryans was located in present-day Iraq, which is connected to ancient stories of gods who came from the sky, literally the ETs. You know, the Muslims still believe that. They believe flying saucers are going to come rescue them. You ever listen to Farrakhan? He says the UFOs are going to come and chase down Whitey. I'm not kidding you. Now, those of you that sat with us and studied the origin of the races and the ethnicities realize that the Aryans were people in that area of Iran, Iraq. Aryan is just a fancy word to say Iranian. And we talked about Hitler. The guy had to find another lineage coming because everybody else is going to be Israeli, aren't they? Israeli, Egyptian, Assyrian. They had to find another lineage. A second branch entered India and intermingled with the existing population. They're mentioned in the Hindu Vedas, also in connection with gods that flew flying machines called Vimanas. It all begins to sound eerily similar to the Theosophists' belief in extraterrestrial visitors. Supported both by funds of Captain Mayer's Army Intelligence Unit and the dedicated anti-communists of the Thule Society, Eckhart quickly gained control of the German Workers' Party, which soon claimed 3,000 members. Lavenda reported that Mayer was reporting to wealthy industrialists and military officers operating out of the Four Seasons Hotel, including a connection between Army Intelligence and Thule Society. April 1920, Hitler changed the party's name to National Socialist German Workers' Party, abbreviated Nazi. Now, just real quick, for the sake of, I think, argument. He changed the Workers' Party to literally Nazi. A National Socialist Workers' Party. Now, how come Democrats always call Republicans Nazis when they're the Nazis? Huh? I think they're both parties are both screwballs, but I'm just wondering why people never figure this out. People are so fickle, aren't they? Aren't people weird? You walk up to a Democrat, you walk up to them and you ask them, you want to pay more taxes or less? And they say less. Right? So you want to keep more money that you earn? They say yes. So you're not a Democrat, you're a Republican. And they say no. Then you ask them, well, in light of schools not doing a good job and government funding that, you're probably in favor of some alternative, right? They say, yeah. So you're a Republican. They say, no, I'm a Democrat. Isn't that funny? Everything they say they believe in, they don't. Just makes me laugh that Democrats call Republicans Nazis. And the Republicans aren't socialists. I've just always wondered. Hitler changes the Workers' Party to Nazis. Beginning in 1923, the Volkskerker Beobachter became a daily. It's talking about a newspaper they started to print. Racial Observer. At the beginning of 1923, the Racial Observer became a daily, giving Hitler a prerequisite of all German politics and political parties. A daily newspaper in which to preach the party's gospels. It is apparent that the Nazis would never have existed without the aid and support of the German Reichswehr and the secret Thule Society. A study of 25 points formulated in 1922 by Hitler, Drexel, and Eckert were the basis of the Nazi Party, reveals many more whose identical standards started with the ideals of Marxism, indicating common origin. Hitler's support group. Despite his clear intentions to nationalize and curtail the power of international business and finance, Hitler had little trouble getting funds from the corporate sponsors who saw National Socialism as a welcome alternative to communism. Now, let me ask you a question. Here you got Hitler, who doesn't want socialism or communism, but yet he doesn't want industrial commercialism. Now, do you understand what's taking place? They don't want to be communists like the Russians, but yet they don't want to be industrialist commercial like the British and the Americans. So to him, being a Nazi is good. Now, why would people, or at least these powers that be, support him? Who created communism? Remember, we went through the formula? Thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis. Or synthesis, remember that? We talked about why it was so strange that after World War II, the U.S. and the Allies decided they were going to let Russia take Berlin. Remember we talked about that? It's just questions to ponder. How come we kick the crap out of the Germans and then let the Russians take Berlin? Huh? I think crap our pants because they launched Sputnik? Huh? Why did we let them into Germany to collect rocket science and jet science and that type of technology? If we feared them? See, the problem was the people that made them didn't fear them either. Now, why don't they fear Hitler? Huh? Despite clear intentions to nationalize or curtail power of international business and finance. Now, if you're going to curtail industry and finance, wouldn't these bankers be mad? Where do you think he got his money from? Isn't that funny? Now, what does communism say? Communism says we're going to take everything from everybody, including the rich, and then we're going to distribute evenly with everybody. How come that didn't bother the rich people? Why did they? Isn't that funny? Socialism says we don't want rich people, we want everybody to be even. How come these powers that be, or these great financiers, how come they supported it? Because basically they were businessmen in the Western industrial and banking circles that guaranteed Hitler's success. After Hitler lost a popular election to an aging war hero, Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg in 1932, 39 business leaders with familiar names like Krupp, Siemens, Thyssen, Bosch. Now, some of you that like tools know who these people are, right? If you like kitchen stuff, you know Krupp's, right? It's got great toasters, great coffee. You all know Krupp's. And if you know cars and if you know power tools, you know Bosch ain't no joke. They signed a petition to Hindenburg urging that Hitler be appointed Chancellor of Germany. Now, why would you want to, if you're a businessman, why would you want to appoint a guy that wants to curtail business and industry? This deal bringing Hitler into government was cut at the home of banker Baron Kurt von Schroeder on January 4, 1933, according to Eustace Mullins, who attending this meeting were John Foster Allen Dulles of the New York law firm Sullivan and Cromwell. Now, Dulles is the guy they named the airport after. Huh? Can you imagine being at this meeting where they installed Hitler? He represented the Schroeder Bank. The next year, Rosenberg represented Hitler in England. He met there with the Schroeder Bank of London managing director T.C. Tierks, who was also director of the Bank of England. Throughout World War II, Schroeder Bank acted as the financial agent for Germany in both Britain and the United States. Now, real quick, we can't forget the Warburgs, right? Remember the Warburgs? You got Felix Warburg running the Bank of France, Max Warburg running the Bank of Germany, and Paul Warburg in charge of the Federal Reserve in the U.S. Schroeder, the powerful head of the J.H. Stein Company, banking house of Cologne, had long provided financial support to the Nazis in hopes they would counteract the spread of communism. Hitler had pledged his word to von Schroeder that the National Socialism would engage in no foolish economic experiments. In other words, he would not attack banking practices except in rhetoric. That's a nice agreement to come into him. With this assurance and with Schroeder's blessing, Hitler was named Chancellor of Germany by the senile President Hindenburg on January 30th, 1933. It says a week later, the Reichstag, or the Parliament building, was burnt in a fire blamed on the communists. A few days later, Hitler was given dictatorial power with the passage of an emergency decree called the Enabling Act, euphemistically titled the Law to Remove Distress of the People and State. He began to assume control of the government. We're going to stop there, because he later becomes the absolute Führer of all of Germany. Next week, we're going to talk about where this guy came from, because everybody knows he was the bastard son of somebody. I won't tell you who that somebody is till next week. I think y'all can guess. Any questions?